So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's roundtable discussion on emergency preparedness for IVF labs. So today's webinar is presented by the International IVF Alliance, aka 2A. My name is Yifei Liu. I am the president of 2A, and I'm also your host for today. So 2A is founded by a group of embryologists and REI providers. The reason that we founded this organization group and then is we want to share knowledge and insights and want to challenge conventional thinking and exchange ideas and foster collaborations, and also want to connect all the reproductive health professionals and build an IVF community for us to work together and do a better job. And then we're going to host a monthly webinars, and we do have QR code for LinkedIn and Facebook. And please scan the QR code and then subscribe and follow us. And also we are gonna put the recording on YouTube. And if you search IVF, International IVF Alliance, you will find our channel. And then please subscribe, and you can watch the recording anytime you want. Okay. And as the professionals dedicated to the delicate and complex world of assisted reproduction, we know that the integrity of our work relies on not just on scientific excellence, but also on our ability to safeguard the most precious elements of life, our patients' sperm, embryos, eggs, and all circumstances. Whether facing natural disasters, power outage, or unforeseen emergencies, preparedness isn't just a protocol, it's a responsibility. So today we're privileged to have with us is Jimmy Diaz, and he's a senior biorepository manager and also senior embryologist at CryoFuture. Jimmy brings a wealth of experience in managing biorepositories and navigating crisis situations with precision and foresight. He will share invaluable insights into best practice for specimen security, effective crisis response strategies, and maintaining lab continuity when every second counts. So just want you guys to know that this is more than just a discussion. It's an opportunity to reflect, learn, and strengthen the resilience of our labs. So thank you so much for joining us. And I encourage you to engage actively, ask questions, and share experiences. And we work together to ensure that no matter the challenge, we're always prepared. Before we actually get started, I would like to thank the embryologists who contributed to this session. And the first one is me, I'm your host. And second one is Wei Zhang. She is the lab manager at Reproductive Partners San Diego. And also Dr. Yu, she is the program director of the EVMS Master and PhD program. And also Eileen, she is the senior embryologist at Sutter Health, San Jose. Okay, so I want to thank everybody who contributed to this session. And Jimmy, please take it away.
Thank you.
Let me stop sharing, and then you can get started.
Yes, can you guys see?
Hold on.
Yes. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay,
I can
great.
see your screen. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I just want to say thank you guys for having me and contributing to the knowledge that, will help all of us. So I'm going to get started. So today I'm going to be talking about crisis to control and how to prepare for an emergency or when disaster strikes in the IVF lab. So just to keep it neutral, I will disclose that I do work for CryoFuture and I have no significant financial interests or relationships with anyone else. So on today's agenda, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of cryogenics and go into the tank anatomy. And then I'm going to give a brief overview of the types of catastrophes that we have right now, or most of us have experienced, or the common ones. I'm going to discuss natural ones versus non-natural disasters, go into tank failures, talk a little bit about tank management, and ultimately how to develop a plan in about 3 steps to have sort of a plan when a disaster strikes. And also knowing the type, who to pick when disaster strikes and who to come help you. So a little history about cryogenics. Cryogenics actually dates all the way back to around 200 BC. Though its uses were pretty elementary back then. Ice was actually used mainly to preserve food, typically a mixture of ice and rice. And then around 600 AD, it later inspired Marco Polo, who brought around the concept of ice cream to Italy in 1300s. Over time, cryogenics grew far beyond food preservation, and it started to get used for other materials too. A big milestone came actually in 1892 when James Dewar invented the Dewar, a special container that we now know for storing cryogenic substances. Over the 60 years, it actually stayed about the same for a long time. And it wasn't until about the 1950s that the Dewar got a major upgrade, turning it into a multi-layered system and leading to the advanced cryogenic tanks that we know today. The newer tanks actually offer more options, meeting the rising need for specialized storage and transport solutions, especially for sensitive materials like reproductive tissue. While the history of cryopreservation is full of fascinating developments, and I can probably go deep into it, it's worth noting much of this progress came from a trial and error and gradually improving over time. When the first IVF babies were conceived nearly 40 years ago, it took years of work to develop the technology that we have now. Many actually thought that IVF would be unpopular, but the rise in IVF procedures isn't just visible in the numbers. It's something that's felt in the lab every single day. That's why having a reliable tank system has become so important. The tanks that we have today go just beyond innovation, and it's actually a result of several key factors coming in together. One of those is the need for equipment that maintains temperature stability, which is essential for maintaining reproductive tissue safe. And of course, breakthroughs in science have really made us understand and improve cooling techniques over the years. And of course, the rapid growth of cryopreservation methods like vitrification and more recently, ultra-fast vitrification. Reproductive biologists like myself have frozen thousands, if not more, eggs, embryos, and other reproductive tissues over the years, creating a huge demand for a reliable system to store and transport them. And let's, of course, not forget the legal side of things, where past catastrophes have even taught us critical lessons that have now shaped how we handle disaster. So here I just kind of outlined the anatomy of the tank. As you can see in the diagram here, this is the most common storage tank that's present in most IVF labs now. They're cylindrical in shape, made of stainless steel or aluminum. They are multi-layered, and they come vacuum pressurized with insulated sides. All of these things combined help prevent boiling and minimize loss of liquid nitrogen, all while maintaining a temperature of negative 196, even when the liquid is dumped out, creating a beautifully crafted, stable tank. But even the toughest tanks can crack under pressure. Natural disasters don't just cause damage, they actually bring about chaos and stress for everyone involved. From a business perspective, this can mean loss of revenue, unhappy patients, broken contracts, and even bigger legal issues. For the clinical leadership teams, deciding whether you want to evacuate during these types of events is actually one of the hardest decisions to make. It's had a major impact on both safety and operations. Disasters, often like hurricanes, snowstorms, and floods, typically we get warnings about, allowing us time to prepare ahead. But then we have disasters like earthquakes, fires, and tsunamis that can strike out of nowhere, making it even more important to be prepared and have a plan. With the right planning, IVF clinics can stay ahead of both the predictable and unpredictable events, all while keeping the risks low and keeping operations continued. One of the most recent accidents or catastrophes that I experienced was here in California, was the Los Angeles Pacific Palisades fire. Fueled by strong winds and devastating fires, it tore through multiple cities that actually spread throughout the Los Angeles area. It caused chaos and destruction that ultimately forced clinics to evacuate and move tanks to a safe zone area. The photo taken here you can see was actually taken by one of our lab team. It shows thick smoke that covered the skies during the disaster. These fires happened during the notorious Santa Ana winds, which are hot, dry gusts from the deserts that seriously increase wildfire risks along the coast. This can happen to anyone and anywhere. So hopefully this example makes us think about the emergency preparedness plans that we have in place right now, because this was definitely one event that nobody saw coming. Now, I do want to talk about fires a little bit. So some things to keep in mind about fires that one, they're usually unexpected. And two, they're often caused by natural events. Surprisingly, they're not caused by people, at least not on purpose. But when you factor in things like wind and location, fires can create a domino effect, leading to power outages, roof collapses, and all kinds of destruction. Fires combined with smoke can have a huge impact on clinics and healthcare facilities. Flames typically cause immediate damage, but smoke brings its own problems. When they seep into vents and polluting gas lines, smoke's acidic residue can actually corrode metal, leading to more problems, putting extra stress on the lab and the lab equipment. Eggs and embryos are already delicate, so having smoke fill the lab and into our gas lines can introduce toxins and affect the embryos and culture. Next, we have storms, snowstorms. While this isn't really an issue here in California, it is a serious concern in many other states because snowstorms can disrupt patient care and put both patients and staff at risk when roads become unsafe. Power outages are a major concern when the winter is very severe. Generators can fail and ultimately can cause a clinic to lose power entirely. And if there's an excess snow, like a blizzard, snow buildup on generators can block the intake and exhaust systems, and it can soak the air filters, causing the generator to fail. Without power backup, clinics face serious challenges. To prevent this, I recommend that you regularly check your generators and set up a maintenance schedule and stick to it. Adding a protective roof over your generator can help by preventing snow buildup and improving ventilation. And of course, let's not forget the road closures. These can delay and disrupt emergency services, lab supply deliveries, specimen transports, or tank pickups. One of the solutions I like to give, and not just because I work in storage, is offsite storage. Offsite storage facilities are typically built to protect specimens even during emergencies. They're designed for disaster preparedness and are a smart way to keep patients safe. Plus, they reduce the need for last-minute transportation calls and emergency patient consenting. Like I said, just because I work in storage, this is also a good thing that I like to recommend. Next, we have earthquakes. Earthquakes are devastating. To me, they're personally very scary, but what's even worse about them is how they come. They affect the structures and how structures respond to them. Unlike other disasters, earthquakes often come without warning, making them particularly dangerous. Even a moderate earthquake poses a big risk. Uncertainty about the structural safety of the buildings raises a concern for everyone. There was a study done by the New England Journal of Medicine that analyzed hospital evacuations in Northridge, California. There was an earthquake here in Northridge, California years ago, and the study found that falling items like buildings inside the building, like ceilings, tiles, lights, and medical equipment were the main reason for immediate evacuations, while structural damages like cracks in the walls and foundations, while less common, usually cause bigger problems. When inspectors found that structural damages, buildings were often condemned, meaning there was a forcing of urgent evacuation plans. Even with elevators and powers out, hospitals actually found in the study that simple tools like blankets and mattresses were useful for patient transportation. This highlights the importance of planning ahead, even with basic material. One of the solutions I always recommend is to consider getting a seismic risk assessment for your facility, especially if you're in an earthquake-prone area like California. Because living in California, here, our facility, we had a seismic assessment done for the vault housing our storage tanks. The evaluation actually confirmed that our tanks could handle the combined weight of the building and nearby structures, ensuring safety and stability. This ultimately provides confidence that the specimen during an earthquake will remain safe. Now, I sort of touched up on this on the previous disasters that I was talking about, but I do want to talk about power outages. I included here a graph that was from planetcentral.org that shows the major sources of power outages. As you can see here in this graph, severe weather leads the list at the top, with winter storms coming in second. I didn't really talk about tsunamis and hurricanes here, but they are a major cause of power loss. They can knock out electricity, cut off clean water access, contaminate our equipment, and even force evacuations. For multi-level floor buildings, this could mean moving equipment from the first floor to the third floor. For example, take Hurricane Katrina. Some hospitals were actually out of power for a week. This is just a clear reminder of how important it is to regularly check and maintain your generators, and this is especially critical for clinics that rely on electricity year-round to run your equipment, your alarms, and other systems. Without power, getting into your lab or your facility could be impossible, and of course, could lead to embryos dying. And while breathing into incubators can supply CO2, it might seem like a quick fix, but it's actually not an ideal solution. So for the staff and the embryos and culture. So if your clinic is in an area that's prone to tsunamis or hurricane, it might be a good idea to again consider offsite storage to an area that isn't really prone to tsunamis or hurricane. This could be a remote spot with backup generators or even a nearby clinic that can help store and take care of your sample equipment during a flooding. Now, I do want to also talk about tank failures. Nowadays, they are becoming more rare, but when it does happen, this is devastating and certainly a catastrophe to talk about. Tank failures typically don't happen out of nowhere. You don't just walk into your lab and one day find an empty tank with fluid liquid on the floor. Most of the time, they are warning signs. And in some rare cases, failure can happen suddenly, like when there's an unexpected loss of vacuum between the inner and the outer containers. And this can cause a rapid increase in temperature spikes within just a short few hours. Since reproductive tissues like eggs and embryos must stay below negative 130 degrees Celsius to avoid irreversible damage, even brief exposure to higher temperatures can actually lead to irreversible cellular damage. Now, to my knowledge, the exact cause of tank failures in the IVF labs aren't clear, but one thing is, failures can and do happen. Whether it's due to natural disasters or aging equipment, no storage equipment is completely foolproof. Past incidents have made that painfully obvious. There is, however, a positive to this. Accidents like this and incidents like this have forced us to tough but necessary conversations, such as, are we prepared? As prepared as we think? Are we focusing on quality or just doing the bare minimum? For some labs, I do understand that limited budget means relying on basic tools like measuring sticks to monitor liquid nitrogen levels instead of using advanced technology. But you also want to ask yourself, do we have a clear and actionable plan for when something does go wrong? We can't prepare for every disaster, but having a solid plan, even for a few, gives us a framework for handling other unexpected issues. And although this is still a catastrophe that can escalate into something big. Small transportation tanks, forgetting to fill your transportation tanks, not closing them properly, or leaving them on the side during the transportation, despite the clear do not tilt sign that most shipper shells have, is something many of us deal with or have dealt with for at least once a year. This is certainly not only stressful, but can lead to disasters during transportation or for the receiving clinic. A study a few years ago presented at ASRM looked at how specimens were handled in dewars, canisters, canes, and gauntlets by embryologists. The study showed that lab staff took different amounts of time to retrieve specimens, which suggests that everyone handles them a bit differently. While it might not seem like a huge deal, it really highlights the importance of how important it is to train and standardize how lab staff handle specimens to avoid disaster, whether it's for storage or for transportation. Take dry shippers, for example. They need to be charged with liquid nitrogen, but it's important for all staff to know that they're not shipped with liquid nitrogen. They're actually done in dry vapor. And staff should also know how to properly place them in shipping containers, completely inside and all the way to the bottom, not sticking out. Whether it's retrieving specimens for thawing, storing, or transportation, having a clear protocol and standardizing practices is key to reducing the risk for disaster. Now here, whether you're running a new lab or an established one, being prepared for the worst is a must. In order to avoid a tank failure that stems from natural disasters, tank management and placement of your tanks is important to know. So I always recommend that you make sure to assess where your tanks are placed in your facility. They are in an open space that's easy to access, and always have backup liquid nitrogen tanks on hand. A validated spare tank or two on hand for quick specimen transfers in the event that a tank does begin to show early signs of failure. I recommend having all clinics have a solid validation and quality control protocol in place for both storage and transportation tanks. Now, to manage your tanks, it's important to start with a strong validation protocol for all of them, not just your storage tanks, including those small transportation and shipper tanks that we often use for quarantine when the results aren't back for a patient yet. Typically, the validation protocols are recommended to be done once a year, but if a tank isn't static, meaning if you're not using it and it's not moving around, I recommend that you validate them more often, at least every time that you use it, either to transport within the clinic or transport out of the clinic. You should be running some sort of validation with them. You should also record the temperature for at least 24 hours after each use. For larger tanks, weight-based monitoring is also a recommendation I typically tell people. You also want to test your tanks and your monitoring equipment regularly. You want to run a mock drill to check for failures at least once a quarter, though at your facility, whether it's at your facility or have this done by somebody else. We do this monthly at our facility. And also don't forget to have proper quality control and a standard operating procedure in place, because daily quality control isn't just making sure that your equipment works, it helps you spot potential tank issues early. Again, at our facility, we do 24-hour validations after every transport, and we collect data year-round. Interestingly, what the data showed so far is that the static hold times for our dry shipper tanks can vary, not just between different tank models or manufacturers, but even between tanks of the same type. Sometimes the difference is as much as 7 days. That's why it's important to validate each tank individually. Sure, it takes a little bit more time, but it's worth it. It actually helped us catch a failing tank before we even used it, saving us a major headache later. So before we move on to how to develop a plan, I did want to also talk about other types of disasters that aren't really natural, but they are disasters regardless, and some might surprise you. We have human-caused disasters, and I'm referring more to crime, arson, and cyber attacks. These are things that can seriously disrupt operations. And then we have other things like pandemics, accidents, or riots, which can impede workflow. Transportation disasters, this typically doesn't happen, but we've all seen movies or accidents where a car crashed into a power line, caused an entire city to lose power. Then we have technology-related failures. Yes, technology is great when it works, but if failed and not properly maintained, it can be a disaster. Negligence and complacency can turn small problems into big problems quickly. And then we have terrorist attacks and meteors, which these are extremely rare, and I'm talking about less than a 1% chance, but they're not impossible. So it's always good to be aware, no matter how unlikely. So some questions to ask yourself, because disaster, as we know, can cause major problems, not just for the facility, but for a business. We can have loss of revenue, unhappy patients, broken contracts, or even lawsuits. That's why having a plan is very critical. Now, before you develop a plan, you may want to know a few things. You may want to ask yourself, how prepared are we to handle a disaster? Do you know who's in your perimeter? Because they can actually be your most valuable allies in tough situations. So building a network that's reliable in your area is really useful. Do you also know the nearest clinic or biorepository in case of evacuations? Whether your facility is either 1 mile or 50 miles, you need to know how far your specimens are going to be taken out and how fast you'll be able to recover them. You also want to ask questions. Do they have spare LN2 tank? Do you have a spare tank in general? And do you have enough space to store your tanks in an emergency? And most importantly, you want to know who to call in an emergency. Your contacts should be an expert with the resources and knowledge to handle reproductive tissue with care. It should be as easy as picking up the phone and dialing. No delays, no guesswork. One suggestion I always like to give clinics is just don't leave transportation to chance. Always rely on professionals who understand the stakes. Experience matters. It's not a job for the police. It's not a job for the firefighters or even the gym staff next door, no matter how strong they look. So being prepared for emergencies, like I mentioned, is crucial to keeping your clinic safe, protecting your team and your patients, and of course, the property. So getting back on track quickly after a crisis is really important. Here, I'm going to outline 3 steps to help you develop a plan for when disaster comes. So first, like I mentioned before, you want to do a risk assessment in your specific area. Your location plays a big role in the type of risks and disasters that your facility are going to be faced with and what you need to do to prepare for. Secondly, you want to check where your equipment is placed. Assess where everything is placed around. Make sure that there's good airflow around in case there's a spill, keeping alarms like oxygen sensors easy to reach, and secure equipment in spots where they'll cause the least amount of trouble during an earthquake, because you want to be able to evacuate quickly and you don't want to be stumbling around. So smart placement keeps the lab staff safe and protects equipment from permanent damage. Then you want to run a brief business analysis. You want to review the costs, backup facility contracts, try to form a contract with any other clinic or facility, and compare the evacuation plans against potential risks. Clearly define when to evacuate and when to stay put. It'll really help you manage disasters more effectively. And then finally, for the first part, the 4th step in step 1 is to just keep emergency supplies stocked and ready. Make sure that your monitoring systems stay functional during evacuations, or if the building is hard to get to, keep backup supplies in handy, like a backup key or a knockbox with an extra key. This ultimately doesn't just help you get into the building, but it helps first responders get in quickly during a fire or a major power outage. Once you've completed your assessment on your facility, the next step is to implement. Start by ensuring that you have enough monitoring systems in place, both on site and at your backup facility. If tanks are evacuated, all parties need to have access to your monitoring system. And it goes without saying that every lab should have 24/7, 365 days a year monitoring. Even if there aren't cycles that are active, the presence of storage tanks requires constant oversight. This provides peace of mind and eliminates uncertainty. And of course, have a direct contact. Know your direct contact. All lab staff need to have a clear contact during emergencies. Planning during a disaster is way too late. Have a call with your local facility or biorepository to help customize and implement a plan, as most biorepositories already have a framework ready to customize. Next, know your specific role. Every lab member or every staff in the lab should know their role in case of a disaster. That includes figuring out who needs to be at the lab first, who follows. If it's a freeze-all emergency, who's needed? Usually it's whoever's the closest or the lab leaders. But it's important to know your specific role when disaster strikes. Next, implement an emergency training. Once the plan is ready, make sure to train your team and to handle emergencies effectively. Hold regular discussions or run through a mock drill.
Did.
Just like firefighters, lab staff need to practice and stay calm and make smart decisions in tough situations. Even something as simple as going over a call list or facility directory can make a huge difference. I've been in labs where this kind of planning made disasters less stressful. And above all, I do want to mention that I know we are talking about emergency preparedness and preventing risk, but lab staff safety should come first. Never prioritize specimens over your own safety. During a fire or an earthquake, run or take cover. Leave the building immediately when it's safe to do so. And then the final step is, of course, in your plan, you should have a way to focus on recovery. This part of your plan should kick in as soon as things settle down. The recovery step is all about fixing damage, getting operations back to normal, supporting your team, and keeping patients informed. Also, you should take this opportunity to update your emergency plan and take note of what's worked and what didn't, and how you could be better prepared if something similar like this happens again. Now, the last part of my talk, I would like to say that having an emergency plan is essential, but it is also just as important to know who is going to execute it. In the event of a tank evacuation due to fires, for example, who's going to be transporting your tanks? You want to ask a few important key questions and think about these things when there is disaster. Treat this as you would as a dating. Ask questions. Get to know the facility or the transportation company. For example, the facility capacity. Does the facility have enough space for your needs? Visit it in person. I always recommend that you visit the place that you are going to bring your tanks to and to see if they can fit your equipment. For example, like I mentioned, in an evacuation scenario, is there room to fit 40 tanks? That's really important to know because you don't want to be transporting it somewhere where they may not have space. And then, of course, you want to know the transport logistics. How far are your specimens going to travel? Will you use an escort service for longer trips? And what's the plan for getting them back safely after the emergency? While transport is usually safe, moving them across state lines can actually involve more risk. So you need to know how it's going to be done. And of course, you want to know the people that are going to be transporting it, you want to be confident that they have expertise and training. Are the individuals handling your tanks at least aware of the specimens that they're going to be transporting? Do they know cryogenic storage? Because these are things that are vital to have experienced professionals at both the clinical and biorepository level to have. Well, we can't predict every disaster. We can reduce the risks with preparation and by building a reliable, experienced team. For those in the clinical and healthcare field, emergency planning isn't just about compliance. It's about protecting patients, the staff, and the community, and it's a responsibility we cannot ignore. Thank you. If you have any questions, thank you for listening. Please feel free to contact me. If you have any questions or need help customizing a plan for your facility, you can reach me at my email. And if you have any other questions that you would rather not ask publicly, please don't hesitate to send me a message. I'm more than happy to help. Thank you.